Chapter 9. On my way to get some lunch, my mind whirled. Man, first the internet is connected, and then Dad says it's not. He lied right to my face. And lying only came that easily when you did it a lot. So what else was he lying about? Little Miss Perfect skipped down the hall towards me. Eli, you want to come with me? See the... Shut up. First my mom, now my little sister. Was Therese that stupid? How can you be with them? Spend time with them. Her chin rose as her hands went to her hips. Eli, someone has to take care of them. Mom can't do it all. Lexi and I have to help. I couldn't do anything but shake my head and walk away. When had the supplements morphed into family members? Even pondering it, even pondering it was distasteful. The supplements were already the cause of too much weirdness in our world, like the short-lived experiment with tea. We weren't really drinking tea, we just called our snack time tea thanks to Therese and her obsession with everything British. In the early years underground, we snacked on milk and stale cookies, but real milk had died with the cows. The UHT milk lasted a long time, but the powdered milk lasted until year 4. Dad had counted too much on the cows. Mistake number 47. One afternoon, Lexi and Therese sat down with me for our afternoon snack of milk and cookies. Mom usually mixed up some of the powdered milk and poured a glass for each of us, one of those old-fashioned juice glasses with the little flowers on it. I always guzzled mine down rather than use it to wash down the cookies. For those 2.5 seconds every day, I pretended that I was still in the old world, Elle standing by to refill my glass with an icy gallon jug of Land O'Lakes 2%. But that day, Mom wasn't there. Dad was. And the glasses were already filled when he brought the tray to the table. As always, I chugged mine. It didn't taste like the powdered milk we usually had. It was strange. Not in a bad way, more like the leftover milk at the bottom of a bowl of Cheerios with sugar. I stuffed a ginger snap in my mouth as Lexi and Therese took their time sipping their milk after every few bites of cookies. Dad didn't join us. He just waited until we were finished, then cleared his throat. Without any great theatrics, he told us the powdered milk was gone, and where that day's milk had come from. Mom had an electric breast pump, and like a cow, the more she pumped, the more she produced. I was 13, and Lexi was 15. Mom and Dad were still getting along. Dad called her his little Holstein because as long as she ate well and got enough rest, she produced a lot of milk, plenty for the supplements, and for us. I gagged and leaned over toward the floor. What? Lexi looked up at Dad. She looked as repulsed as I felt. Dad shrugged. You're all still young, growing. You need nutrients wherever you can get them. This milk has calories, vitamin D, folic acid. I tuned him out, not wanting to hear some lengthy explanation. Like the scientific facts would justify it all. Like we were all supposed to say, "Oh, Father, thank you again for saving us." Yeah, right. The next day, the glasses were waiting at our spots. I crossed my arms and sat there. But it wasn't like we had a choice when Dad put his mind to something. My protest was short-lived, and in the end I believed I had no choice but to drink it and gag, Lexi and Therese, too. Until one day Dad wasn't there at tea time, Mom silently set powdered milk in front of us, and we never had the other tea again. That experience was just another thing in our new world that we wouldn't have even considered in the old, like the supplements. No way in hell was I going to get to know them, not if there was the remotest chance they would meet their intended fate. In the kitchen, over a lunch of warm tortillas from a big batch Mom froze before the flour went bad, and fresh salsa, I pulled out a swivel bar stool at the counter a few feet away from Lexi. Her long hair was up and her velour was pink. She picked at her food, ignoring me. The need to feel normal overwhelmed me. My world seemed so turned on its end that I needed to get a grip. Bothering my sister might help. You're pretty in pink. Her face turned my way with a hint of a smile. No, wait. You're pretty pathetic in pink. I laughed. Her placid expression became a sneer. Screw you. What has you all cranky on this beautiful day? I smeared salsa all over my tortilla. She rolled her eyes. Mom is just so smug. I took a drink of water and slammed my glass on the counter. The smug thing again? Dad might be smug. Mom certainly wasn't. Lexi read my mind. Hello, she's smug. She's in a bomb shelter for cripe's sake. What the hell does she have to be smug about? Lexi ripped her tortilla into little pieces. Don't you get it? She has everything she wants. A husband who dotes on her. No worries. My laughter was so instantaneous I almost choked. No worries. Take a look around. Lexi sipped her water. You look. What do most mothers of teenagers worry about? I shrugged and stuffed half a tortilla in my mouth, displaying it for her. Gross. She shifted her gaze away from me. They worry about their kids driving cars because they might get in an accident. They worry if they don't come home on time. Then there's drugs, alcohol, tons of crap. What's your point, Lex? One of her hands slapped the counter. She doesn't have to worry about any of it. Her kids are all here. Her rich husband isn't going to run off with his secretary. With part of a tortilla, I scooped up some errant salsa. You're forgetting the fact she's trapped underground with a husband who... I never voiced the truth out loud. I didn't think I could. What? Lexi had stopped eating to stare at me. I shrugged. Come on, a husband who what? What were you going to say? Nothing. She turned to Baby Talk to talk me. Is widow Eli afraid? I practically shouted the words. A husband who breeds new kids to feed... I practically shouted the words. A husband who breeds new kids to feed his old ones. Lexi's mouth dropped open. I didn't even need to pause for effect. There's a type of dinosaur that did the same thing. I snapped my fingers. Hey, they can name it after Dad. The Yankakosaurus. Lexi glared at me. How can you say that? I hadn't meant to. She pissed me off and it just slipped out. Since it did, I kept going. God, you're so clueless. He lies to us all the time. Always has. At least Mom never lies. I bet she would give anything to have us out in the world, even with all that. I think she would leave this place in a heartbeat. Lexi bit her lip. You're on her side? She was really starting to ruin my lunch. Last time I checked, we're all on the same side. The underside. Hello, Eli. We're not all on the same side. Lexi launched off of her stool. You think you're better than me, that you're smarter? In the old world, you... She stopped. The look on her face made me curious. What? She blew out a big breath. You were such a brat. You never cared about anybody. You got away with it because you had Eddie. You had your own little wonderful world with your twin, always there for you. You never knew what it was like to be lonely. As I chewed, I thought about it. She wasn't wrong. Her eyes narrowed. You know what it was like for me? Some salsa dripped down my chin. I wiped it off with a paper napkin. Of course not, because you never cared enough to ask. At school, everyone was my friend because of who I was, how much money we had. I never really knew if any of my friends liked me for me. You never had to worry about that because you always had Eddie. I crumpled the napkin, dropping it on my plate. Not anymore. Exactly. Her words were biting. Poor Eli. Now you're in the same boat as the rest of us. Guess what? You don't want to hear it, but you're like me. And me and you, we're just like Dad. We don't care about other people, and we're only out for ourselves. I pushed away my empty plate. That's a load of bull. It's true, you know it. Therese is just like Mom. She's a weird little kid, but she cares about other people, like Eddie did. That's why Mom and Therese allow themselves to love the supplements, because there's no way they would ever use them for their intended purpose. She paused. But you and me? Hell no. I do my work there and then leave. You stay away completely. Dad says it's woman's work. Her eyes narrowed. Don't blame it on him. I rolled my eyes. Then who was I supposed to blame? You stay away, she leaned closer. Know why? Because you know deep down if it comes down to starving, we will do what we need to do. She jabbed her finger in the air toward me. The problem is you're deluded. You think you're with Mom and Therese on this one. You aren't. And the day will come when you have to pick a side. Lexi reached toward me. I jumped back. She laughed. Freak. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving her dishes. She was wrong. I hope she was wrong anyways. Wrong about me and Dad, even if I was like Dad. He was brilliant. But was he a good man? I picked up Lexi's dishes and put them in the dishwasher with mine. I wiped up some salsa that had spilled on the counter. Without all the kitchen staff we were used to, I'd learned to clean up after myself. Hated it at first, wondered why there couldn't be woman's work too. But I'd once read that it only takes 20 days to create a new habit. And I'd had way more than that to change my ways. Dad came in holding a book and awkwardly scratching his right arm. You already have lunch? Yeah. Dad sat down and started to read. He looked as if he'd be there a while. I hoped so. I wanted to see if the internet was up. I stopped by my room to grab Eddie's laptop. I jogged over to Dad's office. I sat down in the hallway cross-legged and hit the laptop's power button. I tapped my leg with the back of my hand. Come on, come on. And there it was. Wireless network not available. What? No. I was right beside the office door. Same spot I was in last time. What was different? Dad. The last time Dad had been in his office. Did he only have it flipped on when he was there? Just in case someone wandered down the hall with a laptop? I sat up straight. That was exactly it. He couldn't keep the wireless signal from going out in the hall. It was easier to keep people out of the hall, and easier still to keep internet capability off of computers. My hands tightened on the laptop, which had just become the most crucial item in my possession. Until I got a chance to connect to the internet, until I knew what was really going on, one thing was for sure: I'd have to keep my dad from finding out. Chapter 10. That night I dreamed of turduckens. Succulent rows of them lined up side by side on the banquet table in the ballroom of our Seattle house. The glowing amber digits of my clock proclaimed 4:13 a.m. When I woke up, my appetite tortured. Lying there and reminiscing made it 1,000 times worse, but it felt impossible to move as the memory rushed back. Eddie and I were 8. Dad ordered a dozen turduckens to feed the guests at our annual Christmas Eve dinner. Christmas mornings were just for family, but the night before was reserved for the hordes of people Dad had worked with over the year. And, being a Rex Yannikakis shindig, the main course had to be something unusual. No run-of-the-mill turkey or ham or goose for my father. So turduckens it was. What is a turducken? An exclusive culinary creation available by special order from some little Cajun town down south. Entirely deboned, a turducken consists of a turkey stuffed with a duck, stuffed with a chicken, like an edible Russian nesting doll. Some were stuffed with alligator, crab, shrimp. My favorite was the traditional cornbread variety. That Christmas Eve, Dad oversaw the kitchen staff himself, making sure everything was perfect. Dressed in tuxedos, Eddie and I stood at the door along with Lexi, who wore a floor-length green velvet dress. With practiced smiles on our faces, we stood there, waiting to greet the guests. We heard the vehicles as they drove in, idling near the front door while the valets hired for the evening helped the guests out before relieving them of their cars. The guests entered through an awning and red carpet set up for the evening. After they gushed over us for a moment or two, they handed off their coats to the servants. Then they were checked off the list, which, I suspected, read like a who's who of anyone of any technological and scientific importance within a 100-mile radius of the Space Needle. Mom loved causes, especially the ones that aimed to save the environment or children in developing countries, and was on the board of many charitable organizations. So the other half of the list, most likely, was a prominent who's who of prominent local activists. With all the activists and scientists, many of whom were probably animal rights people, there must have been plenty of vegetarians in the room. There was no way to tell simply by looking which faction of them might have belonged to. Any of them might have belonged to. This was the party of the season. Everyone was in tuxedos or long evening wear, mingling around, holding their drinks until a tinkling bell signals that it was time to gather around the overflowing buffet table. The three of us lined up next to Mom, who wore a red velvet ball gown, and held Therese, who wore a smaller version. First, Dad made a short speech thanking everyone for being there. Kind of pointless in my opinion, since people would have paid good money to attend that function. The tradition held that Dad was to carve and present the first few servings. So as Dad sliced at the flourish into the turducken, revealing the layers of varying shades of poultry, the room was still, except for the enthusiastic and merry orchestra playing I'll Be Home for Christmas. The smells of the trinity of poultry mingled with the rest of the feast, creating a tantalizing aroma. Thinking about it so many years later, I had to smile as I thought about what might have been going through people's heads as they lined up. The people who didn't eat wondered how to get out of partaking in what was obviously the piece de resistance of the Rex Yannikakis Christmas Eve dinner. The animal rights people cringed, not wanting to voice their objections for fear of pissing off Clea Sheridan Yannikakis, who was very generous to their clauses with her husband's money. The people who did eat meat tried to ignore the jittery non-carnivores surrounding them. In his black Armani tuxedo, Dad set the first slice of turducken on one of the expensive china plates in a tall stack beside him and held it up. Get a plate for me, and you can pile on the rest of the buffet. Who's first? He passed out the plates. Murmurs arose until the noise levels back to normal. From my place beside Mom, I glanced around the room as people ate, most avoiding the 430-calorie serving of striated poultry resting in an ominous fashion on their plates. Then, after the first turducken was served, Dad started making the rounds. I watched him make small talk, perhaps asking if they'd tried the turducken yet. He'd wait while each guest had eaten at least one bite in front of him. ever the dutiful host, making sure his guests were taken care of. After everyone had been served, the young Kaka's children were ushered upstairs, where we changed into pajamas and ate our own turducken dinner. Eddie and I loved the stuff. Grumpy Els brought huge pieces up to our TV room. Rich and flavorful, turducken was perfect for making Christmas Eve dinner memorable. Like every year when we'd finished eating, Eddie and I hid in the library, the one room in our mansion where guests thought they could escape to unnoticed. Eddie and I had learned that during parties, the library was where we were most likely to spy someone saying or doing something, well, interesting. Our social life was sheltered, to say the least. Rare were the moments when we were allowed to go somewhere on our own without supervision. We lived for the unpredictable moments that Dad's dinner guests usually provided. His belly full like mine, Eddie usually actually fell asleep in our hiding spot in one of the long storage seats along the window. We'd stuff pillows in for comfort, too much so in Eddie's case. Though the music was muffled from my vantage point, I heard the orchestra move on to traditional carols. I stayed awake by humming softly with the songs I knew. During Hark the Herald Angel Sings, someone came in the library. I lifted the cover to hear better, trying not to make any noise. I immediately recognized the man by his voice, Dad's accountant, Phil. He was with a woman. She groaned. I ate too much. This dress is tight now. Stupid turducken. I heard sloppy sounds. The woman spoke again. Do you think Rex realized how many vegetarians had their first bite of meat in, like, decades tonight? I can't believe no one just flat out refused. They could have just said no. How do you refuse Rex Yanakakis? Especially when he's standing right there. Phil's voice was a growl. He loves that. What do you mean? The meat. He knew half the guests were vegetarian or vegan or PETA. It was a game. A game? Oh, yeah. The let's see what I can get them to do just because I'm Rex Yanakakis game. He said that? Phil laughed. Of course not. It's always like this with him. He won't brag or use his name to get preferential treatment, but once in a while he has to test his power to see how far his name and money and reputation will go. The woman's dress rustled. He does so much good with his money. Exactly. Which is why he can get away with this. That's why we all let him get away with it. I can't believe he would think that way. Phil chuckled. If Rex is anything, it's calculating. His whole life is planned. When he was 18, he lost out on a prestigious fellowship to a Chinese girl. Of course, by that time, his parents were dead, and he had plenty of money for school. It still irked him. He told me he swore at the time that it would never happen to any kids of his. So what's he do? Marries a hot Chinese chick. I thought she was Hawaiian. Yeah, she's Chinese, too. He sends those twins of his to Chinese school. There were more sounds, smooching. She spoke again. So what do you do for him? I mean, any company secrets you can share? Oh, I'm working on something big. What? She squealed. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. Phil pushed out a contented sigh. Let's just say I'm going to retire a very wealthy man. The orchestra began a slow, beautiful rendition of O Holy Night. Goosebumps rose on my arms. Suddenly, my stomach stuffed with the turkey, stuffed with the duck, stuffed with the chicken was not as settled as previously thought. I shoved the bench cover as far as it would go, springing up and racing past the two adults. They were locked tight in an embrace, and if they noticed me slipping by them, they didn't let on. I tried to make it to the bathroom, but my foot caught on the hallway carpet. I tripped, landing on the floor in time to spew my guts on the shoes in front of me, white orthopedic Oxford that belonged to Els. I hadn't thought about that night for a long time. Maybe I'd forgotten it. Well, until the moment after the turducken dream, the memory of that Christmas Eve was so clear, like it had just happened. That totally sucked to hear Phil say those things about my dad. I was 8. Dad was my hero. I thought he was everyone else's too. I never doubted it before that night. But thinking about that night, about Phil, I made a connection. How deeply was he involved in the compound and the secrecy surrounding it? How far had he gone to keep it a secret? I tossed and turned, my heart pounding. I must have drifted back to sleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, I awoke to warm hands on my face, slapping sweetly. I tried to see through my grogginess and my hair, as my hands automatically formed a shield. Therese giggled. My eyes snapped into focus. A blonde-haired cherubim sat on my chest, gurgling as it smacked me again. It was one of the supplements. What the? Reese! I sat up and pushed the thing off me. Get out of here! I tried to jump out of bed, but my legs were entangled in the sheets. I only succeeded in falling onto the floor, dragging most of the bedding with me. Get out! Calm down. He's just a child. Therese bounced the supplement in her arm. Quinn, can you say Eli? Get out of here, I yelled, throwing pillows at her, hard, until I drove them out of my room. I kicked free of my covers and lunged for the door, slamming it behind them. My legs shook too hard to hold me. I collapsed against the wall, my hair covering my face. My breath came too fast. My heartbeat skipped. Sweat broke out of my forehead. One of the supplements had touched me. For 6 years, no one had touched me, skin on skin. Little Miss Perfect didn't understand. She didn't understand how our circumstances would deteriorate, forcing us to do things no one should ever have to do, things necessary for our survival, things that would become impossible to carry out if we ever came to care for the supplements. With both hands, I tucked my hair back from my face, holding it there for a moment as I tried to compose myself. Still trembling, I walked into the bathroom and didn't get in the shower until it was steaming hot. I wanted the fragrant soap and flowing water to wash away the unwelcome touch, the dream, the memory of that long ago Christmas party, everything. It didn't work, because no matter how I tried, I couldn't erase how fresh and soft those little hands had been on my face. I refused to let myself dwell on how exquisite that warm, innocent touch had felt. A touch like that was meant for someone good, for someone who deserved it. A touch like that was not meant for someone like me.